All right, I guess we're live. Well, welcome to this special edition of Deploy on Friday. My name is John Bristow, and we have a couple of special guests with us today, Bob Walker and Colin Bowern. They will be joining us for today's discussion. Before we turn things over to them to have an opinion about things that we'll be talking about, I just want to set some context here. So the reason why we've come together for this edition of Deploy on Friday is to discuss what recently happened last week involving CrowdStrike. So this is a blog post that they published called the Preliminary Post-Incident Review, or PIR, the content configuration update impacting the Falcon sensor and the Windows operating system, or BSOD, or blue screen of death. Now, in case you weren't aware, there was an update that affected approximately about 8.5 million Windows machines last week. You may have seen about it in the news on CNN and otherwise reputable news sources. Airports were affected, hospitals were affected, lots and lots of folks were affected. And unfortunately, a lot of administrators have had to do a lot of work over the past few days to mitigate or resolve the faulty update that was propagated by CrowdStrike. We're not going to get into the technical details as to why this happened and kind of like, you know, the underpinnings of it. But what we wanted to focus on was really the parts of the blog that we found most interesting, which was how do we prevent this from happening again? So in particular, there's an aspect here that talks about how relative to the incident itself, it involves a thing called the rapid response content. So the rapid response content, for lack of a better term, is like, you know, when AV definitions go out, AV vendors have to mitigate against threats that are usually day 0, day 1, that sort of thing. And so they use this sort of content file and content files and configuration for mitigating against that. Some of the things that jumped out on us, and this is where I'd like to bring in Bob and Colin to discuss, is the staggered deployment strategy, or the lack thereof, the lack of canary deployments, etc. So I've invited Colin and Bob to discuss this with us. And so by way of introduction, Bob is our field CTO. Colin is our SVP of product. You can't get two bigger brains at Octopus Deploy to discuss some of these things with us. So we're going to have a conversation about that. So I'd like to start set the stage here by talking a little bit about Bob, were you affected? Colin, were you affected?
Thankfully I was not, although I was speaking at a conference that day, and all of our work laptops, they all have CrowdStrike installed on it. So as being a paranoid individual, I sent myself the presentations to my personal laptop. So I had 2 laptops ready to go just in case.
Let's prepare for those demo fails.
Yeah, I was like, well, I won't be able to demo anything, but at least I can talk to you and show you some.
And were you delayed at the airport on the way back?
No, this was actually a local conference. It was only a 45-minute drive.
So lucky.
Yes.
And how about you, Colin?
So what we've learned is the traffic light system doesn't run CrowdStrike.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
No, I wasn't. I've this laptop refresh cycle. I'm on a MacBook, longtime Windows user, so not affected. But yeah, there's definitely folks around me in both R&D at Octopus and other parts of Octopus that were affected. We have as well our cloud service. We run workloads in the cloud. And so our dynamic workers were affected, but really proud of the incident response on our side. We were back up and running within an hour or two, thanks to our crack cloud platform team. They were all over this. So yeah,
awesome.
I felt bad for our club. I was looking at that incident channel. I felt bad for the cloud platform team, because as they're trying to solve that issue, their laptops, anyone who had Windows, their devices started blue screening at the same time. I'm like, oh man, talk about stress.
And on the upside,
how about yourself? Were you affected?
That happened immediately. Oh. Yeah.
No, I wasn't affected.
Were you affected?
No, I run a Mac, so I wasn't affected. Yeah, it was really interesting though. I mean, I saw people, engineers and people noticing the issue well before almost it was reported in any of the outlets. I think we were well and truly on top of it.
Right. You were like me, like your dog on the couch there over the weekend.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm running a Mac. I don't care.
Whatever.
It's all good. Yeah. So Bob and Colin, you hinted at the fact that we were affected a little bit. Can we provide a little bit more detail as to what happened?
Yeah, so status.octopus.com will have a little bit of the details around it, but we run customer workloads, deployment commands on our workers in the cloud. we use CrowdStrike to, just like everybody else, to prevent against malware, especially emerging malware from being run and abused for the cloud. And we quickly jumped in to resolve the issue. And so, we were in and up and running. Thankfully, our again, engineers were able to pin the version in our dynamic worker infrastructure, so we could get back to reprovisioning new dynamic workers from an image fairly quickly. So again, just amazing work. Really super proud of the team for their world-class incident response here. Obviously, out in the world, not everybody was as lucky in terms of either access to systems, lots of kind of remote endpoints that got affected, in places where, from a deployment perspective, you start to think about, well, I only update this thing once in a while. And when I think update, I tend to always think software. And in this case, as you kind of said right out of the gate, John, it was beyond software. This was effectively a configuration or a data file update that was deployed. And so nobody ever thinks about, like, what if that goes wrong? And so even right down to the controls in Falcon itself don't allow you to treat that somehow differently from this, from the application code. And this is obviously something they've now acknowledged and will implement. And other EDR vendors have now come out and shared their versions of how they do it. And it looks like there are some out there, at least, that are more aware of these sorts of things. But I want to kind of bring this back from CrowdStrike and, like, what can we learn as software teams out there about this? And there'll be the obvious kind of don't deploy everywhere all at once. Kind of use stage rollouts and whatnot. But I think actually there's a bigger issue here. And Bob, I'm really curious, kind of some of the things that you see in the field. This is when we think about deployments at Octopus, it's deploying anything. Mm-hmm. And so it's that idea of it's a change going into production. And it should have that level of rigor, whether it's code, a database schema update, or a configuration change. These are the things that, like, all of these factors affect these running systems. And it could be something even downstream, dependency. You've got a microservice that was updated that then triggered everything else. Like the variables of change have changed dramatically in the last 10 years. It's gone from my server, which is relatively self-contained, to my highly connected service with a bunch of moving parts, and all of those things change. And I think that's hopefully the wake-up call here, is that change is more than just application code. But yeah, Bob, what do you think?
It was funny when I was reading the incident response channel, because obviously this all occurred when I was asleep. So thankfully they had it resolved by the time I woke up, but I was just reading it and going through it. And a lot of the statements that were being said in that channel, eerily similar to statements I've uttered as a developer when a unknown database change went out, because we weren't treating the database like our application source code, and we're just smashing our heads against the wall, like, what changed? Why is this suddenly failing? And it's because the store procedure changed. And very similar to, like, their configuration files, you can dynamically change behavior in your application in a store procedure or a configuration file like this, and that's scary to me. So yes, it's still a thing where everyone just treats their C# code as the most important thing, versus you need to treat everything in your application, not just your C# code. Like, everything that can change your application should be versioned.
Yeah, and I worry about that with, like, as we think about, like, for example, I see a lot more teams using feature flags these days.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
And it's so easy to kind of just flip the switch, but again, forget about the fact that there's real people on the other end.
Yeah.
And that flag could cause, again, a level of destruction. It might be corruption in the data. It might be something unintended. And so again, I think this comes back to us as a great reminder to think about any changes to things that affect the running of my application, be it configuration, database schema, application code, or feature flags. These are all things that we got to treat with the same level of kind of care, and think about what could go wrong and how would we recover from that.
I think what was telling to me was, again, going through the incident channel, it's such a microscope to be able to see what I imagine everyone else kind of went through the same thing is, why is this failing? What changed? What rolled out? And when you don't do the things like the deployment, or using a deployment tool, or just any tool where you don't have auditing, where you don't know the standard who, what, when, where, why, when you don't know what changed, it's significantly difficult. So when they're going through and they go, okay, what version should we go to? Should we go to this version or to this version? It's like, actually, no, it's an out of band version. Oh, what is going on here? What version is that? It's like, oh, that's not even a version. That's just a file. And not having that audit history, not having the quote unquote, the metadata to tell you what has changed is such a big concern when that happens. And obviously, like, yeah, you definitely need to have it to be able to debug and limit, because really debugging in my mind is kind of it's a game of eliminating possibilities. And when you don't know what's going on, you have an infinite number of possibilities. But when you have that information, you can narrow it down to, okay, it's probably like one of these 3 or 4 or 5 things.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And look, it's neat because it came across at a time. So, if you go to roadmap.octopus.com or octopus.com/roadmap, we're considering things like feature toggles and the role it plays. As we think about Octopus Deploy, we're deploying change. Like, it used to be we're deploying a package. No, we're deploying change.
Yeah.
And so, we're in our under consideration, we're thinking a lot about feature toggles. We have a little proof of concept running inside Octopus where we're dog fooding this concept. And so the feature toggle one kind of got another look through about, like, how does that change show up when people flip that toggle? How do we make that visible in the stream? And it's one of the things that we're most excited to. So if you don't already know, we Octopus acquired CodeFresh and CodeFresh GitOps. And one of the neat things that they do is they have this timeline view of change to environments.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that's adding a lot of value on top of things like Argo CD, because it's bringing all the relevant developer context, the change context. It's not just a commit hash and a manifest file checked into Git. It's actually, here's all the other relevant information that make that hash mean something. And so, these are the sorts of things that are like, this is a great reminder for all of us to kind of think about, how would I detect this change happening in the environment? Back to your point, process of elimination, something's gone wrong. How do I figure out what are all the different things that might have affected that? And then how do I react and roll back? Is it flip a feature toggle back to off? Do I recover by rolling an old release? Do I need a channel to ship an emergency fix?
Yeah.
Is that the right strategy? And like in Octopus, we have channels for that purpose of being able to make sure that the high priority stuff gets at the door, along with task prioritization to bump that right up the task queue when you got to get something out the door. And so I think about all those things. Like, this is a really interesting scenario. It's like, how do you now kind of game this? Think about all those InfoSec teams out there, the red team, blue team. How do you game bad changes in your environment? And that's hopefully the discussion that's happening around every software team in the world right now, is like, hey, this could happen to us.
Yeah.
And what are all the dimensions of change that happen to our application? And how would we detect? How would we recover? How would we be able to isolate fairly quickly what it is? And that's where
I think I have an answer to that. You could give everyone a $10 Uber Eats card. There you go.
Yeah.
Cost you 3.5 billion. Well, was it 3.5 or 5.5 or something, like billions of dollars? Here's a $10 Uber Eats card. But it's
sorry.
It's interesting with that, because when you start thinking through those recovery strategies, oftentimes, like, you think about, okay, how does that, what's your deployment strategy? Because, like you said, is it a feature flag that I disable? I know internally, like, we were pushing out some changes into Octopus Cloud. We're getting some feedback from our customers, like, okay, we're just going to stop this rollout of all, to the rest of the fleet, so to speak, and then we're going to fix the issues, address the problem, and more of like a roll forward, and then we're going to continue to kind of do this more pragmatic style of deployments. I like how you switch that over to dark mode quickly, John.
Sorry, I know it's late for you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's all good. But then it's also a case of, like you said, like, being able to still follow the process for emergency fixes like this. that to me is the most important thing. Like if your process is so cumbersome and it takes so long that you can't continue to follow your exact same deployment process to recover, that's a pretty big indication that you need to start taking a big evaluation as to your tooling. And I personally, from personal experience, I can state that I have brought down a production SQL server, and I've basically stopped an entire company dead in its tracks. And using the tools such as TeamCity and Octopus, we were able to recover. Once we figured out what the issue was, we were able to recover and push a fix up within 30 minutes, but we were able to follow our exact same process. Like we weren't going into the servers themselves and changing this file or changing this configuration. It was, no, we're following the exact same rigor that we've had before in the past. And this is why you need tools like that in a proper CI/CD pipeline.
The other interesting bit here was this was also one of those changes where the magnitude probably wasn't like the process to deploy.
Yeah.
It wasn't visible right away. It was visible about 15 minutes later. And it had me think one of the things that we're working on right now on octopus.com/roadmap, you'll see under the plan tab, Kubernetes live object status. And this is us starting to think a little bit about deployment verification after the command is executed. And it's being brought on, like, this is one of those really neat things, like in IT, we wanted to do desired state for a long time.
Yep.
Kubernetes was envisioned and made it happen. And now the tooling needs to adapt for the concept of desired state. And what does it mean to verify deployment is successful? And so just it's another example of evolving our thinking around deployment verification by thinking about what do the objects look like 15, 20, 30 minutes later.
Yeah.
And so, when you think about some of these changes, again, what if you're to deploy a change today, how quickly would you see that it's catastrophic and it's time to pull the cord?
Yeah. One of the interesting things is, for again, what a lesson we can learn from that PIR, which is that there was a bug in their validator. So, I mean, this is one of those cases where you need to constantly be not only testing your tests, but like if you have something that's doing that type of testing, you need to make sure you're constantly validating that. And so yeah, I say post validation, if you run the exact same test that has the exact same bug in it, that's not really going to help you out too much. So yes, it goes, but like I said, it's a very interesting case study in terms of lessons that we can take away from a lot of this.
Yeah, and I imagine every QA engineer is taking this up to their boss as they argue for more budget.
Yeah.
And say, look, this is why we need to do more QA testing.
One of the things I thought was interesting there, and I don't really want to spend a ton of time talking about testing, but it's part of post deployment verification, which is testing with real world data. I really didn't get a sense of, once they pushed up a configuration update, that they're going through and they're almost like writing, I mean, I hate to say it, but like writing a virus that actually would cause their antivirus to trigger something like that. It was like, no, we do stress testing and we do like heuristic matching and everything like that. But I didn't really get that sense inside of there that, like, hey, you need to actually test with real world data once you push up to your test or your staging environments. I mean, that's a big part about that as well, your verification, because how do you know if it's going to work? It's more than just, oh, no, we just made sure that it follows these couple rules that we have in place on something like that.
So Bob, it's not called data, it's called problematic content. Right?
Unless it's all zeros.
Yes.
Clearly they didn't have that.
I'm calling all my null references as problematic content
data.
from now on. There you go.
Yeah. No, there's that. There's also, I mean, there'll never be enough testing either. Like
100%.
This is the other side, and so, like, some of the approaches that one of the other vendors takes, they have a fail-safe mechanism where a configuration file, if it causes so many crashes, it'll actually revert the configuration file. And I thought, like, there's some neat ways to think about that. But actually, one of the things I'd love to talk a little bit about, though, is also the culture of kind of when you see things go wrong. Maybe, Jim, you could talk a little bit about kind of cord pulls at Octopus, just as a psychological concept inside software teams. Because again, this is one of the, we don't always ship perfect software. And you have this point where developers and engineers see something and they pull these cords. So maybe Jim, do you want to talk about just the psychology behind the cord pull and what we do to make it safe?
Yeah, I might actually like bring up an example of something that happened just recently. We were working on a feature, and the PR had merged, been reviewed by other people, so we'd done everything right to sort of make sure this change was safe. But after it merged, someone was looking through their own code and went, "Oh, hang on, there's a mistake," and they pulled the cord straight away. Now, it turns out it wouldn't have caused a problem because it was already behind a feature toggle and everything. But like you were saying, we've spent a lot of time talking about the culture of safety and thinking about the impact of causing problems in our system, which deploys other people's software, and just driving home the fact that you can pull this cord, this and-on cord, right, and it stops the releases going out. I'm not sure how, maybe I should have explained it first, but it stops the releases going out for now. It doesn't stop, like it doesn't cause long-term damage. You can stop it for now and then start it again in a little while. So it's a really safe thing to do, but it's also really helps stop getting changes out there.
Nice.
There we go.
It also kind of goes, it's interesting you say you had the feature toggle, and it kind of goes back to a point that Colin was making, which was, how do you imagine if someone had just enabled that feature toggle because they're like, oh, this is for this thing I'm working on, and I need to start getting some feedback, not realizing the impact that could potentially have. So I think pulling the and-on cord in that case was definitely 100% the right thing to do.
Oh,
to
yeah.
prevent that from propagating out.
It's also defense in depth here, right? As well.
100%.
We've got this and-on cord that people pull that can slow things down while we check out what's actually happening. We've got the feature toggle that turns on, and that does roll out slowly across our customer base. That we always have these monitoring plans in place as we roll out those changes.
And I think this is it. This should be a point every software team should talk about. This could be me.
Yeah.
This could be me, not just Friday. This could happen any day of the week, any hour of the day. Let's start to, tabletop exercise. What would we do if this were to happen? How would we detect it? How would we mitigate it? How would we have prevented it? And it's all these examples, the and-on cord, the, kind of progressive release, the treating everything as a deployment artifact in some form or another. It's these things that add up. And this is why I love it. I mean, we're all live and breathe in this space. And this is why we want to build tools in this space, because we want to give teams first-class experiences to be able to do this. And, to me, the best performing teams in the world are the ones that it's not any one of these things, it's all of these things. And, I think a lot about, for example, Sidney Decker, who did a lot of work on safety and human factors. And, he talks a lot about healthcare and airline industry and stuff like that. But, for us, this is as critical as, we are releasing software to production. This is the same as flying 500 people in an airline.
Oh, yeah.
And, in our world. And so we treat it with that safety and try and build in those mechanisms. But, we're always going to learn something too. And so hopefully, as the mem culture dies down around this, people will actually take the time to actually have that, okay, so what would this look like in our world, in our context? And so hopefully a few of the ideas here we're discussing kind of trigger some conversations, whether it's hey, do we have a concept of an and-on cord, or how do we see change of all the things? What are the things that could change?
And how can we, the other thing is also, how can we, for our particular application, do a phased rollout approach? Oftentimes, I think a lot of people think, oh, in order to do a phased rollout approach, I need to do a quote-unquote rolling deployment, or I need to do a canary-style deployment where I redirect, a subset of percentage of my traffic to, the new version of my code or anything like that. But nothing actually could be farther from the truth. Feature toggles are a fantastic way to do that phased deployment. You release it to a subset of people, and then you slowly increase the number of the groups that actually get access to that. But I also look at how we do it internally at Octopus Cloud, where we're doing a phased approach when we roll out customer instances. We're using our own tool to do something like that. We're leveraging our multi-tenancy feature in that particular case, where it's okay, we're going to deploy to a subset of these instances, mostly because, that's when the maintenance window is. But also, internally, we deploy to our deploy instance, and we're dogfooding our own thing. And that to me is another huge thing. It's you should be dogfooding your own application and finding these issues and annoyances before it gets to be a bigger problem on something like that.
This all
Yep.
feels like I told you so, finger wagging. We're not trying to
No.
be that way. We're not.
No.
But,
No.
it is important. So
These are all hard
Okay.
lessons that we learned. I mean,
What's the saying? Never waste a good crisis.
yeah. Yeah.
some good comments here from the channel. So Nick says, and our style process stops the problem spreading further while you work out how bad it is.
Yeah.
And then Nick also goes on to say, sometimes you only discover the exact problematic content on customer systems. Very true. It's also situational, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes high latency can cause problems. Sometimes, you hit firewalls in certain customer scenarios. So very, very good insight. A couple of questions here that came in. Heidi did ask, do they have QA teams? I would imagine they do. And then another question from Heidi who has CrowdStrike tested before deployment? I would imagine they do.
Yeah.
They do write in detail about how they have support for early adopters as part of their deployment process, but it's very vague. It's not really we're not really certain as to how it goes.
Yeah, that appeared to be more focused on their sensor itself versus the actual
code. I'm deploying code, so I'll put a bunch of controls around the code.
But not the content.
Why can't I extend that to the configuration?
If you want a really interesting in-depth look at the difference between like the sensor and why it caused such a big havoc with once you launch the configuration, it caused this crash. David Plummer, who's a former Microsoft engineer, he worked on the Windows OS itself. He has his own YouTube channel, and he did a really good in-depth analysis of it. And he's like, this is the reason why. He talks about the user modes and the kernel modes and how it's a kernel driver and everything along those lines. And so because it's a kernel driver, it also has to go through other extensive
this is a
testing.
PDF that I found from Security Now folks.
I wanted to see, it looked like Serenity Now for a second.
Yeah, sorry. So it's a 28-page PDF that goes into great detail as to what actually may have happened, possibly happened, etc. But this is a summary of the show, and it was entitled CrowdStrike. And so you can watch the episode of that if you're inclined to read more about it. I'm sure everyone has talked about this on every YouTube channel possible.
As soon as I saw null pointer reference exception, I just started having PTSD from my college days when my professor was like, we want to do pointers to pointers of arrays. I'm like, who does this?
But Colin, to your point, I mean, like the memes. Come on, the memes are so good. Like you can't beat these memes. Sorry.
Yeah, we're definitely as an industry stepping up our game. First it was fancy names and cool logos, and now we got just meme catalogs on the back of this. Yeah,
perfect. Cool. So we've talked about multi-tenancy, obviously, in the context of all of this. We've talked about how we try to do deployments at Octopus. Again, we're not trying to say I told you so, but we're a big advocate in having automated processes by having the ability to fall back, etc. So anything else we want to add?
I think this is like, this is where, really purpose-built tools can help, hopefully.
Yeah.
And look, if there's a scenario that we don't satisfy, we'd love to hear from you. Octopus.com/roadmap. There's a submit idea in the top right-hand corner. If you're trying to model something and we can't help you, or you're trying to verify or recover something and we can't help you, tell us about it, because this is what we geek out on quite regularly. There's a whole crew internally, designers, product managers, engineers, solutions engineers. Like, we're all kind of trying to figure out how to crack this, and give you all the best tools that make it easy to do this. So definitely, please let us know if you use us or you use another tool and you don't see it. So again, we want to earn your business by building the best tool for deployments on the planet. So
and I want to say that that's all we think about all day, every day, is deployments and how can we make deployments better, and what are our customers trying to deploy today. And that's what gets me excited, because coming from a situation where I had to deploy 2 a.m. Saturday and it took 3 hours to deploy, I never want to have another person go through something like that again. And so anytime, like, that's what gets me up in the morning. That's what gets me excited and jazzed about all this. And I know everyone, like, that works here gets the same excitement level about, oh, I get, it can help customers solve this type of thing. And again, back to that's why I love the idea of best in breed tools and purpose built tools. Use the right tool for the job versus just trying to hammer together and with enough elbow grease with, string tie and duct tape. And yeah, we eventually got something working.
Yeah. And look, a lot of us have come from that.
yeah.
I've duct taped together, spinning up environments for integration tests to run, SQL scripts to try because I wanted to be sure when I went and deployed to production, I was ready. And so we're building tools that we wish we had. We're building tools and we're working on tools next that platform teams hopefully wish they had, for this. So yeah, hopefully, like I said, we nerd out about this all day long. There's 140 plus Octonauts in R&D alone, but it's more than them thinking about this every day. It's our solution engineers, our support folks. We're all thinking about this all day long.
I have to echo that sentiment. I mean, when I was watching the Primogen, who's a very famous YouTuber, Twitch streamer, I had a similar thought.
By the way, the simplest answer to this, rolling releases. Go slow, canary, measure. You're releasing a boot level what the hell is wrong?
Hey, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
Anyway, we make fun, but there you go. Jim, Bob, Colin, thank you very much. And thank you for attending this latest edition of Deploy on Friday, a bit of a special one, so there you go. But yeah, really appreciate your insight and your comments here, and we will go ahead and wrap up the stream. So take care, everyone. Happy deployments, and we'll see you next week.
All right.